Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Zenway podcast. I'm your host, Zenway. In this podcast, we talk everything about life, career, and tech. I spent the last decade at the intersection of social sciences and also technology as well. So today, I'm very excited about today's episode because the last few episodes, I've been talking to quite a lot of psychology majors that decided to do something else.
Right.
And today, I'm talking to someone who has been in the industry, studied psychology, and became a clinical psychologist, right? So I didn't want to sound like, I'm like encouraging people to not
move
away from psychology, right? So I'm very, very happy to have, Joel in the house today, and he's, spent the longest time in clinical psychologist, right? So at the Mind, you spent more than 8 years, and you also appeared on, Lite FM as well, answering some questions, and you are also the president of MSCP, which is the Clinical Psychologists Association, right?
That's right.
So we're going to talk a lot more about that, and I think I want to spend a little bit more time also talking about men's mental health as well.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So before we go in, right, can you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and
Sure. So I'm one of the boring ones, right? Like what you're saying, Zenway. Meaning to say that I had a very single track career. I studied psychology. I practice psychology. I teach psychology now. So it's really that like I'm a boring person, right? So I've been a clinical psychologist for about 12 years now, I think, if my math isn't failing me, but 12 years. And it's always been in prior practice. What else? I also teach. I teach in Monash University. I teach their counseling program, and I teach them the more practical clinical skills like how to do CBT, for example, assessments and things like that, right? Like you said, I'm also the president of MSCP, Malaysian Society of Clinical Psychology, and that society really is a professional body, I suppose, representation of all the clinical psychologists in Malaysia, right? I think up until 2022, we had no government recognition or official position, right? Until the Allied Health Act was passed. So MSCP really was the only representation that we had as a profession. So I'm the president of that for the next couple of years, and I'm a dad of two little monsters at home.
Two lovely daughters, right?
Lovely. It's always perspectives, right? CBT, very good. Jody's
practicing reframing, even though I've moved out of practicing as a mental health professional.
That's right. Jody's 8, Nelly's 4, so they keep our hands full, that's for sure.
Right. Thanks so much for that. I wanted to kind of touch on a few things. Right, but before that, this gives me permission to stalk your profile without being really sounding like a creep. I saw something really interesting. Like I think you're the overseeing, psychologist for Mensa or something like that. Yeah. What is that?
No, not overseeing lah. So what happens is that Mensa International and then Mensa Malaysia. Right? So I work for Mensa Malaysia. Mensa is basically an association for geniuses, right? So we are talking about people who are in the 98th percentile of the IQ of the population and above, right? So which means your IQ score varies from age to age anyways. So what I do as a member of the psychologist for Mensa is that I screen through the assessment reports to make sure that the IQ reports that are being sent in are okay. That means they're not done by some quack therapist. Like Joel can't do an IQ test on Joel and then put myself into Mensa, for example. Making sure the test was done properly, the scores are adequate, and then I will recommend entry into Mensa, basically. The fun part is, I'm not even a member of Mensa, because I don't know what my IQ is, so I have no idea.
Right. Does it also does it also involve, because I would imagine that because these people, they are so gifted, their developmental needs may be different, and to advise them on, maybe there are certain situations that pertains the individual and the young children, for example.
Right. So Mensa Malaysia and Mensa in general, to be fair, I said sort of guidelines to suggest things that could be helpful for people of this kind of intelligence bands, right? Different kind of focuses, for example, or different ways to pursue education and things like that, right? Malaysia, we do have a few. I think there's one called Genus Kunia, if I'm not mistaken. It was created a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken. And it's basically a boarding school for genius students, like young students, primary school, secondary
Right.
school, and they would try and nurture them as best they can.
Right. Sounds like the goal for every Asian parent.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised, actually, there are a lot of times where people try and manufacture IQ results.
Right.
So that's something that I look out for
Oh,
as
wow.
well, right? Because
Okay.
if they do it like multiple times, for example.
I see.
Or
So a little bit of a practice effect going on.
Exactly.
Right.
And we want to prevent that as much as we can. So that's what I
see.
look out for as well.
Right. And tell me a little bit about. I mean, you kept talking about you being a boring person, but I tend to found reframing. I found a different perspective around this, right? Because sometimes it requires time for you to actually find your passion, right? Because it meant that you have spent significant amount of time to understand and to be able to find out what you're good and what you're not good at. So for you to be who you are today for many years, right? There must be a story that perhaps started this whole journey for you, right? Could you share a little bit about the story behind the decision that you wanted to become a clinical psychologist?
Yeah. I think I was quite lucky in the sense that what I wanted to do was also something I was luckily good at as well, right? Or decent at, I won't say good at or decent at. I say that because I knew I wanted to be a psychologist or some semblance of a psychologist since I was like 14, right? So I was one of those typical emo teenagers, like, right? 13, 14 years old, angry at the world hates me, I hate the world, kind of thing, right? And I was just a very bitter and angry child, And then one day, I think my friends got sick and tired. Not one, I think like they were sick and tired of me, right? So this includes my now business partner Kaliong and a few of my other high school friends,
Right.
So this was during the PMR SPM period, right? So they were starting to send us to school in like batches. So like class 1, 3, 5 comes, and then 2, 4 comes tomorrow, and then things like that. So what they did was they dragged me into an empty classroom, and this proceeded to give me. Can I curse on this podcast?
Go ahead and just I think the S word is fine.
Sorry, I forgot to check that before we started.
No, it's okay.
And they proceeded to give me crap for like 2 hours straight, right? Just give me shit and like saying things like, get your head out of your butt. Stop thinking the world owes you a favor. You gotta stop being so emo, basically, right? So lots of crying, lots of screaming ensued and all that kind of things. But I think the one thing that I got out of it when I left was I felt a lot lighter. Crying, of course. But I think what I got out of it was the fact that I had friends that cared. Right? And for a boy who felt that the world hated them, right, it was such a profoundly healing moment for me. Right? And after I got out of it, I was thinking, oh shit, I'm quite lucky to have friends like that. Right? And I thought to myself, does everyone have that kind of luck, have that kind of friends?
Right.
And that really got me started thinking, could I be that friend for other people?
Right.
And that really started me on that journey of trying to be a psychologist. I didn't know what psychologist was, to be fair, at that point.
So this was what, 16, 17?
14.
14,
Right.
wow,
Yeah.
okay.
So then I just started looking around, then my school had that Pembimbing Rakan Sebaya.
Yeah. My school had a weird colour of uniform, they were all in purple.
Okay, no, I was just, you wore your normal school uniform and you joined in, right?
Yeah.
So I started there, and then, I think one of our school counselors, she was the sister of this lecturer in Help, which Help back then was the only psychology school. So she very naturally connected me with that school after I graduated SPM. And it's just been one giant ride towards becoming a psychologist. And now that I think back about it, I'm actually it stuns me how brave/reckless I was in a way, because I had no backup plan. So I was thinking to myself, if I ever failed any way along the way, right, I was screwed, man. I was like, what the hell do I do now, right? So yeah, it was just like that. So that's where I started.
Right.
And along the way, I realized I do have a knack for it. I know I naturally have friends who come up to me and talk to me about the issues and things like that. And I think the knack that I had was that I was a much better listener than I was talker. Right? So people would talk, I would listen, and it would help them, right?
Right.
So that's how I ended up where I am. That's why I was like a boring person.
Got it. Well, I mean, like for I think I sometimes envy those who studied and then practice, right? Because it meant that your journey of education and your journey of really learning what it is, it kind of reinforced what you thought it was, right?
That's true.
Were there moments when you was on your journey to become a clinical psychologist? Was there a moment that your perspective has changed? Either it has you question yourself a little bit, or you kind of further reinforce this is it, right?
Question sure got one. The assignment due at midnight is 11:30. Trying to finish assignment, sure got question on that one.
It's like, what am I doing with my life?
Correct. Plenty of times. Submitting your final master's thesis, your PhD thesis, sure got one. Definitely. But I think reinforce Because the thing about psychology is a bit weird compared to other professions, right? Like, you know, if you study law, you get a law degree, then you already have some experience or exposure to law.
Right.
Medicine as well, same thing. You know, things like that, right? Psychology, you don't, right? And you're a psych major, so you know that as a undergrad in psychology, you do a lot of different psychology bits, but you don't do anything specifically,
Right.
Especially the clinical parts, right? So whenever people like say, "Oh, I want to become a psychologist," right, and they want to be a clinician, they don't realize that you need to do your masters at least to practice. So that's the big problem there.
Correct.
So for me, it was really an act of almost fate because I got to hold on to the idea that I'm going to be a practicing psychologist, but I cannot try it out and see whether I'm right for it until my master's, right?
I see.
So I think for me, that big aha moment, and it was really solidified my idea, was when I saw my first client. Saw my first client, wanted to piss my pants, but I think the experience really solidified the fact that yes, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I want to do.
Right. You know, you touch on the aspect around, like, you know, a lot of people don't realize that, you know, they when you go on this path for you to be able to practice, it meant that you have to have a master's either in counseling, clinical psychologist. You know, those are the different paths, right? And, you know, maybe let's take a moment to kind of talk a little bit about clinical psychologists, right? Because I think counselors, you know, it's a little bit more popular, a little bit more common, although there are still a lot of myths, right? So let's maybe, like, you know, explain it like, you know, we're five in terms of what does a psychologist do, what's the difference between the clinical psychologist and the counselor, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So if I were to explain this to my 5-year-old, and I tell my maybe baby this, right?
Yeah.
So daddy's job is to help people feel better, right? That's what I tell her, and I tell her that all the time because she's grumpy all the time. So I try to tell her this is what I do, but for other people as well, right?
Yeah.
Growing up a few years. So I think the major difference between a counselor and a clinical psychologist, and I'll throw in psychiatrists as well, just because that's the three major mental professions.
That's a good
in
point.
Malaysia,
Yeah.
Is really defined by who we see and what we do, right? So a counselor and a clinical psychologist are similar in the sense that we do talk therapy, right? So we use psychology, talk therapy, to try and help people overcome the issues that they're going through, right? The main difference between a counselor and clinical psychologist is the kind of clients that we service, right? Counselors typically see more day-to-day kind of issues, stress at work, relationships, you know, breakups, that kind of thing, transitions and things like that. While a clinical psychologist will see all of that and also clinical populations. So these are people with more severe mental disorders like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and things like that, right? The psychiatrist will see all the clients that clinical psychologists would, but in Malaysia in particular, their main source of treatment is through medication, right? Now I say Malaysia in particular because in the UK and the US, there are a lot of psychiatrists who also dabble in psychotherapy, right? And likewise, in America, I think there are lots of clinical psychologists who also prescribe medication, right? So it's a subcategory kind of thing, but in Malaysia, it's quite clear cut. These are the distinctions,
Right. And you know, I saw that, you know, your specialization is in, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy. And you talk about talk therapy, right? I think what is lesser experience for those who have not tried therapy before, which you absolutely should, is that there are different ways in terms of different theories, right? Different ways to kind of guide you through your particular issue, and one of it is called cognitive behavioral therapy.
That's right.
Right. So, you know, can you talk to us a little bit about that, right? So, how does that compare to other different ways, and you know, what does that actually do?
Okay.
Right?
So I'll start with CBT and then I'll expand out, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So CBT's premise is actually fairly simple, and I can describe by this phrase by, I think it's Descartes, right? I think therefore I am, right? And that's the simplest, truest form of CBT, right? CBT says that, you know, our reality is determined by the thoughts that we have, right? So I give you an example. Getting a promotion at work, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
In most cases, good thing.
Okay.
Yes.
Because
you get better pay, you know, you get respected, you get recognized for your work and stuff like that, right?
That's right. And then those other cases when it's bad, why is it bad?
It's like you more responsibility, more stress. You're afraid that, you know, you can't live up to the expectations.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I know you have a young child at home, right?
Yes.
Having a newborn baby, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
For the most part, a good thing.
Exactly right.
Yes.
new person to love, addition
Yeah.
to the family.
Okay.
Bad news is when it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you have to change
Yeah.
the diaper, or they have a punami lah, right?
Yeah.
Have you had a punami yet?
Yes, I have. You know,
Very
many
good.
times. Now, he's starting to eat solids, right? So it's happening more often, right?
Yes, all the wonderful colours and aromas that you get out of it as well.
Yeah.
So with these two examples, what I'm
Yes.
trying to highlight here is the premise of CBT.
Yeah.
Every situation that we go through in life is actually neutral. It's not a good or bad situation, it's just a situation.
Yeah.
What determines how good or bad it is really our perceptions on it, our take on it, basically, right?
Right.
And if it's based on our perception, that also means that we can get to choose what we want to see and how we will determine a reality, basically. And that's the premise of CBT, because therapy is predicated on the fact that we can control, or CBT therapy at least, is predicated on the fact that we can control what kind of thoughts we want to have about a given situation.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we're going to be like happy, joy all the time. It's not that. But it's just that we are more rational when we're able to choose. We have a choice. It's not out of nothing. It's not spontaneous or anything like that. We get to choose how we want to react to a situation. So that's CBT in a simplistic nutshell.
Right. Yeah, I think it reminded me of, that I think there was an article that talked about how even vacation in a lot of cases has caused people more stress than it is, right? So it's really about how do you actually perceive the situation and all. Yeah, so I think one thing that I wanted to touch on, probably something that you mentioned in the beginning was quite interesting, because I think what people also didn't realize, besides the I guess the different who you see for different things, right? Those 3 roles that we've mentioned. Obviously psychiatrists, being a medical doctor, is regulated. The counselors themselves actually also have a lembaga counseling, which regulates the counselors, in terms of registration and training in Malaysia as well. But interesting enough, the clinical psychologists, only until recently, because of the Allied Health Act, was there's some emphasis on that, right? So talk to me a little bit about the role of MSCP going forward, or what it actually strives to do in the past so many years before that as well, right?
Yeah. So I think with ClinPsych, we always existed, or at least prior to the Allied Health being introduced, right? We've always existed as this lost sheep of the mental health family, because in the eyes of the government, they say, you got psychiatrists, you're counselors, why do we need a third profession? Why do we need someone else to do the things that these two should technically do? Right. And because of that, we've never been given any voice in the government, right? So I think that's why my predecessors, I suppose, in the past, Dr. Alvin, Dr. Lin, and all that kind of people, Dr. Zubaida, they started the MSCP because we needed some kind of representation, number one, so that we had a voice, right? But more importantly, I think our job was, MSCP's job was to try and safeguard the community, right? Even to today, clinical psychology is still a bit of a cowboy town in Malaysia. Meaning to say that there are so many people who are practicing as clinical psychologists who should not be, right? Meaning because they don't have the right education, or they've been found multiple times to have been commit like crimes, not crimes but like unethical behavior, or mistreatment of the clients and things like that. So the community, because they didn't know any better what we did, everything was so mysterious and up in the air. Nobody knew what their rights was or the privileges was, right? MSCP was designed with that in mind as well, to help educate the public and help them understand, hey, this is what we do, this is what your rights and responsibilities are as a client, for example, so that people could be more informed, right? And to this day, that's still what we're trying to champion, right? Nowadays, most companies who want to hire a clinician, a ClinPsych, would look out for MSCP membership as a marker or barometer of how qualified you are, how ethical you've been. So, because if you're doing something unethical, we'll take away your membership, for example.
Right.
So we've become that representation of someone who's eligible to practice, right? What I see happening right now is that, especially in my role as president in this coming term, right, is trying to learn how to coexist with the Allied Health Act, right? Because all this while we've been trying to regulate ourselves, right? Now that the government has stepped in, and I think it's the right move, this should be done, because we need registration and eventually licensing as well, similar to the
some teeth to the to the regulation.
That's right. Because all this time, if someone were to commit some kind of some wrongdoing or whatever it is, right, all they had was the Consumer Tribunal Claims Court or something. That's all they had, right? Nothing else. So now, at least with the government coming in, I think that's the right move. But that also puts into question what MSCP's role is going to be.
Right. Got it.
And that's something that me and my committee are trying to figure out as we go along. This is uncharted territory for us, to be fair, right? It's exciting, scary, because, I was telling my friend that day, I really fear that I'll be the president that be helming MSCP when MSCP becomes like defunct or unnecessary anymore. I'm like, oi, this gives you sleepless nights sometimes. I don't
Right.
think it will be, but
Right,
it's
right,
just irrational fears.
So it's kind of like, because it is not exactly Lembaga Counseling, which is a government entity, right? And MSCP is still, because of its roots and its origin, self-organized and by the community,
Yep.
right? So now that's why there's a question of, does it come the formal regulation
Right.
from the government, or can MSCP then be appointed as the the person that takes away or enforce certain rules, right?
So what's happening with the Allied Health Act is
Yeah.
because it's not just clinics, right? It's all allied health. So dentistry, physios and things are all governed there. And what happens is that each profession will have
Their own body.
Their not body. They have a representative,
Uh-huh.
and then the representative will then elect their own council or whatever you call it, or members or committees, right?
Okay.
So they are very happy to work with us because we have the know-how, right? We've done this for so long. So that's what we're trying to do to be as helpful as possible as well, right? But that's just part of it. I think we also need to rebrand ourselves to offer more to our members as well, right? Like there's no point they come sign up with us and also the Allied Health Act, but you don't get any extra benefit, so there's no inherent benefit to us, right?
Right.
In that sense,
Got it. Right. And it sounds really something like you need to have a lot of discourse and conversation with not just the professionals themselves, but also with the mass public as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right.
Because if they don't understand what you do, then your role becomes less effective.
That's
right.
right. That's
And talking about like really just having discourse with with the public, you have one interesting experience with Lite FM, right? Which is the free clinic and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
How is that like? How's that? Was there like a memorable experience or challenging experience trying to address these kind of questions with, on Lite FM, right? How does that work? Because it's like appearing on a radio show and you talk about something that is largely had a lot of stigma, and now how is that like?
It's been a good experience actually, and I think from the feedback we've been getting of late, I think like you said, I think stigma, that's a big thing, right? A lot of people are more willing to share, right? Previously people would send like anonymous text messages, like some kind of like
essay.
Some weird kind of thing, but now people are happily saying, hey, I'm Bob from don't know where, and I've got this issue, can you help me out? So they're a lot more happy and open to talk about it, which is great, right? A good experience,
right?
And for me, and this FYI, this is like a free thing. Like I don't get paid for appearing on Lite FM or anything like that, right?
Public service is literally.
Exactly, literally, yeah, that's right. But I'm very happy to do it because for me, that's my passion, right? I've always wanted to help people,
right?
And because of my duties as the MSCP president, running my own center, being a dad of two, I don't have the luxury of a lot of time or resources to be able to give back. This is one avenue that I can give back, and I enjoy doing it. And I think the way I see it, like the more I can speak on air, the more people can ask questions, the more I can debunk myths and share information. I love it to bits.
Right. Was there like a few, I guess, questions that you remember very clearly, or maybe some things that was asked, someone asked for help? Yeah.
There are actually some callers that we don't air, right? Because either it's like super sensitive or it's just too intense.
Could be triggering.
Yeah,
right?
correct. So there are some of them, like there was one, for example, they were telling us that the call itself, you could hear someone shouting in the background, right?
Wow.
And they're saying that my I think, was it son or daughter? I can't remember.
Right.
Teenager, right, is having a major tantrum right now, and he does this all the time.
Right.
And because he's getting older and older and older, we don't know how to control this person anymore. But what we do is this is the triggering part. We used to lock him up and tie him up.
Oh dear.
Right? Because they're just so desperate, they just don't know what to do.
Just no support.
Exactly.
They don't know what to do.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think they were calling in from East Malaysia, East Coast, sorry.
Right.
So
Okay.
Kuantan or Terengganu, something like that.
Right.
Unfortunately, the way Malaysian psychologists right now, right, most of us are psychologists, clinical psychologists. Most of us are either in KL or in Penang, right? And there are a few scattered here and there. It's getting better.
Right.
With the Allied Health Act and all that, the government is starting to disperse more people to all the major hospitals, but it's still not the best in the world, right? So because of that, this person not only didn't know what to do, didn't even know what the child was going through.
I see.
Just based on what she was talking about in the call, I think it's one of either autism, which is very severe form of autism, or schizophrenia, potentially. Both of which requires extended treatments. In schizophrenia's case, medication and things like that, right? But I mean, the point is, if she knew what was going on, she could have gotten treatment for the child,
Right.
right? But
Right.
because they didn't know, the only thing they could do was to lock the child up.
I
right?
see. Right.
So I think these are the ones that really break my heart, lah, because
Mm.
it's the only problem here is education, awareness. If they knew, they can fix it. If they don't know, this is what happens, right?
Right.
So that's why I'm very motivated to do
Mm.
talks on Lite or interviews or newspaper articles, just because the more I can share, the more people know, the
Yeah.
more they can do something about it, and
Yeah.
that helps. lah.
Use the platform to reach more people.
Yeah,
as
as
well.
much as I can, and I think
Right.
that's a big passion of mine.
Yeah. And for that particular case, were there any opportunity for them to reach out or for you to reach out?
Yep. So what we did for that one was, again, it wasn't it was an ad, right? So
Yeah.
we responded to the call, and then we told them that, hey, this is what could be going on.
Yeah.
I short of diagnosing the child, I
Of
didn't
course,
say what
yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
And then I told them we need to get them to hospital as soon as possible, lah, right?
Mm.
So then they can get the right treatment and all that, lah.
Yeah.
So last we heard was that they made an appointment to see the GH closest to their general hospital closest to them.
Wow.
And I checked really, they had a psychiatrist
Psychiatry,
at least, lah.
yeah,
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 so they
yeah.
went there.
Yeah.
But after that, we lost touch, like we
Got
don't know
it.
what happened.
Right.
But at least, a step
That's
one.
the first step.
Yeah,
right? That's the
exactly,
first step.
exactly.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. That, I think that one. In the past 3 years, we've been talking about building awareness, and there's a lot of reason why we will sometimes even provide our services for complimentary, right? The
Yeah,
resources
yeah,
on
yeah.
the app and stuff like that. We just want to give it out for free,
Right.
also as part of really just making sure that as many people can get the kind of resources
Yeah,
that
that's
they
right.
want.
Yeah.
I think being involved in the industry for the past 3 years, I think it also reinforced the importance of really the step one is awareness, and then therefore allowing whether does it spur some kind of openness to
Yeah.
actually take action. I think that's really underrated as well.
Yeah.
I think we're so much more fortunate that today there are just a lot more, I guess, resources. Even if you don't want to go face to face, right? You can just have something on your phone, and nobody needs to know as well.
And the best part is, I think it's not just the private sectors or businesses that are doing this. Right? Even
Right.
government's doing a lot of good work in
Yeah.
trying this, right?
Yeah, I think there was one initiative that they wanted to, the I think the vision for, I think it was KJ's initiative, that they wanted to actually place a counselor at every, I think it was a district or perhaps at a state level to ensure there's as many counselors as possible, even at that level. I think they're starting with at least like one.
As in the
a
hospitals,
particular-
is it?
I think in the community centers as well, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I think before COVID started, there was this clinic Mentari thing. I don't know if you've heard about
Yes,
that.
I have. Yeah.
So that got stunted because of COVID, but I think
Mm.
they're going to relaunch that again, and those are basically trying to decentralize psychiatric care away from hospitals, right?
Right.
So that would be a good start as well.
Right.
Like things like Sri Lanka, I think that was great. Sri Lanka, if I'm not mistaken, is the Selangor government's
Yes, initiative,
right,
yeah,
for mental
correct.
health services as well.
Yeah.
So the government's doing pretty good actually. Not too bad, all things considered.
Yeah, I'm quite encouraged that there is some steps in the
Correct,
right
correct.
direction,
Correct,
and it's not just all about just going to the hospitals.
Yeah.
Which I think it's under resourced. And talking about this, right, I was quite curious in terms of like you talk about how like a lot of resources is concentrated in Klang Valley, but at MSCP, for example, how many total members are we talking about in terms of clinical psychologists at this point in time,
Okay.
or perhaps the unofficial count of how many clinical psychologists there are in Malaysia?
Right. So we current members that we have, we're just talking about full members. So these
Yeah.
are not like student members or international members. Just
Practicing members.
That's the thing.
Oh, okay.
We registered members, we have about 400 people.
Okay. Right.
Practicing members, we have no idea.
Got it.
Because we don't have that distinction yet.
Right.
I think once the government system comes in place, they will know better. Right?
I see. Right.
And I say that because I know a lot of people get burnt out as well. Right? So in my class, for example, 10 of us graduated. I think only half of us are practicing right now.
I see.
Right.
Right.
So burnout is a big issue for our profession. So even there's
Yeah.
400 there, I'll be surprised if
Yeah.
300 people are practicing.
Yeah.
I really don't know how many
I
are
see.
practicing, to be fair.
Yeah, I think one insight that I've also kind of like discovered when we're working with so many mental health professionals is that it is just unfortunate that this industry itself it requires so much out of the professional,
Yeah.
and at the same time, unfortunately, financially, it may be hard to sustain, and you find so many of these wonderful people actually working like multiple jobs at the same time, just so that they can continue to practice. as
Survive,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Talking about mental health and awareness and all that, right? I mentioned at the beginning of the show I wanted to kind of spend a little bit more time talking about the men's mental health, right? I think this particular topic was also something that a few of my friends were quite interested in as well. we observe that men usually don't talk about it. And it's actually also supported by data in a sense, because when I was in my previous startup, we realized that actually there were actually more female users as compared to men users. I think it's probably not surprising to you. Why is it so?
So there's this myth that, okay, let's use depression. That's the most easy disorder to talk about. Right? There's this myth that females are more likely to be depressed than males are, right?
Okay.
And to be fair, like you said, the data and the statistics also tells the same thing, right? And the ratio, I think, worldwide is about 2 to 1, around there, 2 females to every 1 male who has depression.
You think it's underreporting?
I think so, because the males that do come in, right, what you do usually find is that they are on a very extreme range, right? So let's give it a score of 100, 0 being nothing, 100 being most severe. Females will tend to come 50 below, they come in already, right? And I think it's the whole cultural expectation stereotype where females are more emotionally connected,
more self-aware.
Yes, that's right. More happy to be vulnerable and things like that, right? Yeah. Where males, especially Asian males, the more tai lam yan ego kind of thing, right? Jaga muka, you can't talk about it kind of thing, right? So typically when they do come in, they're in the 50 and above range, right? The more severe range, right? So it's always really much more critical, and that's why you also see that people who die by suicide a lot more times are men, right? Because they're that much more critical.
Right.
So my suspicion is that it's not that females are more likely to be depressed than males. I think males don't come in and report. So if we don't report, we don't know, right? I think I have a gut feeling that that's the problem here. That's the situation.
Right. So it sounds like, generally speaking, there is a gender difference when it comes to mental health, supporting men's mental health. Right? So what are some of the, I guess, differences in terms of their needs when it comes to supporting them in their mental health well-being in general?
From a therapist perspective?
Yes,
I think the main thing is really about not judging, right? I think even when the men come in also, they're very hesitant, they're very guarded. So like the instant a therapist even hints at the fact that you shouldn't be crying, you shouldn't be sad, what's wrong with you kind of thing, right? How quickly they run away is amazing, right? And this is not just like from a female therapist, even from a guy therapist. Actually, sometimes even as a guy therapist, it's even worse,
right?
Correct. It's like male on male, then you're judging me correct.
Are you looking down on me?
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. So I think that's one of the biggest considerations, So even when they start tearing up and all that, and just allowing them that space to just be whatever and whoever they want to be is so incredibly important, right? The issue here is, I think that a lot of times the things that we typically do for, let's say, females doesn't carry the same weight or doesn't perceive the same way by the males, right? By the men. So that's something we need to navigate a little bit, right? So if you do the same thing all the time and then you don't change it up for the guys in the room, right? That's when you get problems, basically.
Right, interesting. Yeah, I never considered that aspect because, I was, why I asked that question, I think more is around coming from the angle of, let's say, for example, I think one of the reasons why that there's quite a bit of interest when it comes to this is perhaps they just see their loved ones, right, the men's in their life, just not probably seeking help and just not wanting to open up, right? Or perhaps they realize that they just don't process their emotion as well, right? That is the common stereotype for men as well, right? I guess the question is really around how do we actually then as being someone in their life, how do we actually then help them towards the path of just being more open? Because I'm also a believer that we really cannot help people that are not willing to help themselves or not open to help themselves or not ready to help themselves, right? So how do we actually then encourage them to seek more support, or how do we actually then support them without just what you mentioned, right, around making them feel worse about the situation, then shut down completely?
I don't think there is a way, and at least there's no one way or one size fits all kind of way, right? Because every guy is different. Every person is different in that sense, right? I think at the end of the day, it's just making sure that you are able to provide them with an opening or opportunity that whenever they are ready or they just want to try test water and see, that you have something in place for them in that sense, right? It's like one of those things where once bitten, twice shy kind of thing, right? So how when guys, they watch a movie and they tear up and maybe people laugh at them, what is this, what are you crying, right? Even that in its own is enough to shut people up for the rest of their lives, for example, you know. So I think as a community, as a society, we need to be more open to the fact that guys, it's okay for boys to show emotions, right? So this starts from parent level, right? From 2-year-old, 3-year-old level in that sense, right? So I think I'm not saying that our generation above gone case like no,
Messed. It's like you're done.
we still got hope there.
Yeah.
But I think if we want to really make a change, it's gonna start now for the younger generations, like helping them be aware and
Right.
be okay with expressing emotions.
Right.
For the older ones, I think, like I said, like as and when they're ready and willing and able to, give them the opportunity to do so openly. Don't
Right.
judge, don't question, don't ridicule, don't suspect them or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Let them do what they need to do, basically. And that's the best thing to do. Because exactly like you said, at the end of the day, we can't force them if they don't want to. But once they do want to, make sure the door is open as wide as possible. So they can run right through it. Don't make them stop.
Right. Yeah, I think that's important to recognize that even though you may not mean to so-called demean them or look down on them, the slightest hint sometimes can be sensitive, because it's really so hard-rooted that it's so hard for them to come up for help, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Even for me, even like in my practice as well, what I realize is that how when people cry, right? Like when ladies, when they cry, offering them a tissue, whatever, like tissue, issues. I've tried that with guys before, right? And the quickness in terms of them stopping crying is almost like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so sometimes you just so nowadays no, I don't. I just sit down. Just let them do whatever they need to do.
Yeah.
Once they're ready, they'll grab their own tissues and then they'll blow their snot off or whatever, and then let's go.
Got it. Right. In my experience, I mean, I've been to therapy a couple of times, right? I think the effects of the kind of like societal expectation that men cannot show emotions and stuff like that has affected me without me realizing, right? I'm someone that has studied psychology. I'm someone that went through 3 years in the mental health industry and so on and so forth, right? So you would think that I'm probably the one that is the most savvy in navigating my internal self. But then when I go to therapy and I the only advantage I had was that I knew I wanted to cry and I need to cry. But when I go into the session, man, I tell you, I cannot cry even though I wanted to.
Yeah.
So that was a very, revealing moment for me. That
the programming is so
the
strong.
programming
Right?
is so strong that
yeah.
even I want to kind of unshackle that to cry, and sit in the car. And sometimes I find myself wanting to tear up in the car, for example. I say like, yes, this is it. Let's cry, man. And even then, wow, it was
really hard.
so hard.
That's right. And even like for me, even when I do tear up, sometimes the immediate urge to stop right now is so strong. Yeah, it's crazy.
I felt like there was another moment in my when the moment I wanted to tear up, and why like you say I suddenly just stopped crying was that an image of me ugly crying appeared in my head. I'm like, no, nobody can see me ugly cry. I'm just gonna stop right now, even though it was just a fleeting thought. It was quite amazing how we can just shut down because we are so afraid of that.
This is
judgment.
that's why I said, like, if we want to make a major change,
Yeah.
this is start from like kid level, like 2-3-year-old, our kids, our next generations. That's the level we want to start at, because the programming is so strong. It's insanely locked in. Even like females as well, right? Ladies, they're programmed to be emotional, right? So sometimes they just come in and cry. They may ask them, hey, what's going on? What's going through your head? I don't know. I just need to cry. It's like, okay. So it's almost like a reverse kind of thing going on,
Right. Sometimes it may not be constructive in the long term to not talk about what happened.
That's right. So it's just it's crazy. It's programming for you.
Right. And for those of us that had the programming already for a while, right? I think this is important for us to repeat many times. I'm sure you've been asked this question many times. I think it's still important to repeat. Is really to describe what therapy actually looks like from the moment you decided to register and from the moment you decided to reach out, right? What does that look like, right?
Okay.
So that people kind of know, like, it's kind of like knowing what you're getting yourself into, so then it's a little bit less scary in that sense, right? So how does that look like, the moment you say like, yes, I want, and then you go on the website or talk to someone? What does that look like until like maybe you end your session, for example, in a summarized way, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the initial step is acknowledging, I need to go and see a therapist, right? I need help, right? So you go online, you look for a therapist. Now let's start there, right? So when you look for a therapist, right, a lot of times and this is your normal, I don't know whether it's Asian or just normal help-seeking mentality, right? I need to find someone who is the most experienced,
right?
Or a proxy to that is the most expensive, because expensive means better, right? That is the worst possible way to for a therapist, right? Because, and I tell all my clients this as well, right? As experienced as I am, doing this, as good as, or I mean, as okay as I am doing what I'm doing, like in that sense, like, right, I may not be the best therapist for you because there's something that trumps experience and expertise and all that, and that's rapport. It's chemistry between you and the client, right? You know how when you enter a new workplace or a party or whatever it is,
Right.
there instantly there's some people that you want to spend your whole time with, and some people you just want to slap in the face, right? You really have to see them, right?
Yeah.
There's no point you go see the most experienced therapists in
Right.
the world, but the instant you see them, you get this weird squirrely
Just can't
feeling that-
jive,
Correct,
right?
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So there's no point, right?
Right.
So
Cannot relate, right? Sometimes.
yeah,
right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's whether it's age difference or just
Yeah.
chemistry, like you know,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like that,
Yeah.
right? So when you pick a therapist, make sure you find a therapist that jives with you, like you said, right? That fits you, that you feel comfortable with,
Right.
and you think that okay, this is someone I want to
Right.
speak to, right? I think that's your
Right.
starting point,
Right.
right?
But most of the time we just see their photos and the write up, right?
Correct.
So then how?
So there's also this thing where we call whenever resources allow,
yeah.
shopping for therapists,
Right.
So whenever you can, don't settle on the first therapist that you see.
I see.
Try 2 or 3 if you're
Right,
able to,
got it.
right?
Right.
And that way you can find a therapist that fits you best.
Mm.
Don't worry about offending a therapist. We're all trained to encourage that /
Right.
expect that to happen, and there's no hard feelings one usually,
Mm.
right? Because we also understand that there's no point in me seeing a client that's not going to benefit from seeing me, and then it's just a train wreck at the end of the day, right? So start with that. Find someone that you're comfortable with, and then when you set an appointment and things like that, make sure you go in there ready to talk, right? I think at the end of the day, remember that whatever you tell your therapist is everything's going to be confidential, right? You don't have to worry about it as much as the therapist does, because if let's say whatever you tell Bob the therapist, for example, Bob is going to be super worried about breaking any confidentiality without your permission, because if you report him, Bob loses his license. Bob then cannot practice as a practitioner anymore, right? So trust me when I say this, your therapists are more worried about breaching confidentiality than you are, right? So the reason why I emphasize that is because a lot of people come in very hesitant. They
Right.
don't tell the full story. They tell you like 80% of the truth. And for me as a therapist, the best work I do is when I know the full story.
Right.
Then I can connect the dots. I see the patterns and the themes, and then I can reflect it back to you, and then we can find the crux of the problem. When you obscure truths and then there's some big gaping hole somewhere, I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? Like, why is it from here then you get out here? It doesn't make sense. That's when therapy gets stunted and it gets like roadblocks and things like that, right? So go into a session being open and willing and transparent and ready to talk. If you ever wanted to just bare your deepest, darkest secrets, this is the time to do it, basically, right? And after that, it's just a conversation between you and your therapist, right? Not unlike what we're doing right now, for example, right? It's not anything fancy. There's no voodoo involved.
The pocket stopwatch.
No, nothing like that. It's really a conversation between two
Right.
people, and me as a therapist, all I want to know is to understand who you are and get to know
Right.
who you are, right? Now, after that, the experiences will change from therapist to therapist because we do different kinds of therapies and modalities. Oh, I forgot to answer that question from way back.
Right.
Sorry.
The CBT.
Answer that now.
Yeah.
So if you do CBT, then the therapist will naturally be very focused on the thoughts that you have, the
Okay.
beliefs that you have.
Right.
If you do something called ACT, for example, acceptance and commitment therapy, they'll be looking more in terms of the kind of values that you have, what kind of goals that you want to work towards, and things like that. If you do something called, if your therapist does something called SETE, for example, then it's more emotion focused, how do you feel and things like that. So whatever modality they choose, right? I think the important thing to remember here is that there is no such thing as one modality that's better than the others, right? All the modalities are fairly equal.
Right.
The way I see it is this, right?
Right.
Regardless of, it's like using your telco companies, regardless whether you're using Maxis, Digi or Celcom, the main thing is I can go Instagram, TikTok and scroll. That's all I want to do.
Right.
Same thing, right?
Right.
Therapy is the same thing as well.
Right.
You do this job for long enough, you realize that CBT ke, ACT ke, DBT ke, SETE ke, all does the same thing.
Right.
What's the root of the problem? How do you overcome it?
Right. And as a person that attends the therapy session as a client, you don't have to worry about that, right?
Yeah. If your therapist is a competent, decent one, right, you won't even know what therapy styles they're doing. It doesn't matter. And I tell all my young therapists as well. At the end of the day, do you really think your clients care what you're using? As long as they're getting better, that's what matters to them, right? This CBT, these techniques and all that, it's more for you, the therapist, than for the clients.
Right.
I have so many clients who come up to me before, and because CBT is very popular, right? They tell me things like, oh, I don't do CBT. CBT sucks. It doesn't work for me. I want to try something else.
Right.
And with no amount of pride at all, as I say the next few lines, and not being arrogant and things like that, right? I'll tell them this. That's true, but you've not done CBT with me. Not because I'm better, but because my brand of CBT is my brand of CBT, right? The way I present it, I understand it.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, when they come and they do the session with me and ask them how was that session like, he says, where was the CBT? And I say, I was doing CBT all the time. they don't see it because that's my brand, right?
Right.
So it's really for the therapist thing, not for the clients.
Right.
So that's
it's about how well you use a tool, right? So
Exactly.
let's say a
Exactly.
CBT has a hammer, and ACT has a knife,
Yeah.
right? So you sometimes take the hammer and the knife and you put it together, and sometimes you don't, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
let's say like for example, the hammer has a longer or shorter handle.
Yep.
Because I prefer a shorter handle or longer handle. That's different.
Very
right?
nicely put. Very nicely put.
Got it. Right. And in terms of therapy, sometimes it takes multiple sessions, right? There's no such thing as in most instances, one session tough, right?
Yeah.
You gotta get to know each other, get to know the problem and things like that. But how would one know that it's a good session? Of course, you may come out of the session feeling like you probably have more questions or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But how do you know, generally speaking, the sessions are heading in a good direction that is constructive? Be it if it's just one session for you to go and just cry, right?
I think if in terms of whether or not it's doing anything, right? So short term would be how you feel right after the session, right?
Okay.
It doesn't have to be positive. You just need to feel different,
I
right?
see.
And I think this is something that we always remind young therapists and also clients as well, new clients, right? Therapy isn't about making you happy, right? Happy is a happy. It's like a coincidental side effect of therapy. Our therapy is to get you back to okay, right? That's always our goal of any practitioner. I get you to okay. If you're happy after that, great. It's a bonus, right?
Right.
So for you to gauge in the short term whether it's been a good session or not is to see whether you feel a change, right? Is there a change to the situation? Do you feel sadder? Then great. That means there's a movement in therapy. Do you feel better? Then great. There's a movement in therapy, in that sense, because that's what every session should be done, right? There's some kind of movement, right? In the medium to long term, what you're looking for is really about insight, right? I think a lot of times we are stuck in whatever problems they're going through, right? And we're talking about psychological issues, not like tangible issues and things like that, right? It's because we are repeating patterns that we don't know or we don't realize. So it's like on autopilot, basically. You know those Roomba, those vacuum robots, right?
Yeah, vacuum robots, yeah.
They're as smart as you allow it to be, right? So if you put like a potted plant right in the middle, it's just going to keep hammering its head against the potted plant, right? I think sometimes when we are not, and it does that because it's not aware there's a potted plant there, so it's hitting against it. Therapy, I think, is a lot like removing the potted plant, right? Meaning to say that our job is to give you insight, help you realize that, hey, the reason why you've had a string of bad relationships is because you keep self-sabotaging, right? And why does the self-sabotaging happen and all that kind of things happens, right? All the reasons behind it, sorry. Our job is to help you realize that, hey, this is happening because of this. And now you have new insights.
Right.
Now with these new insights, what are you going to do about it, right? And that's then the next part of therapy, the recovery process.
I see. Right. Yeah, and that's really helpful, I think. I think what would you also say for those people who a little bit more self-aware, right? But they don't want to go into therapy because they are afraid that it's going to be very painful and hurtful, and they just don't want to talk about it because they know the potential of talking about certain issues just going to resurface a lot of these kind of things, right? What would you say to those people who are reluctant to seek help because of that?
I think the fact that you're reluctant tells you something about it, right? Why is it that you're so reluctant? What is it that's so bad or painful or scary that you think that this cannot come see the light of day, for example? I think that tells you a lot about what's going on, right? I think therapy is one of those things. It's like surgery, right? If you've got a busted leg you've got a appendix that's about to blow, the only way a surgeon can make you feel better is by making you hurt more. I'm gonna cut you open, like cut out appendix and then sew you up, and then there's a lot more healing and all that goes on after the fact. But the point is your appendix doesn't blow up in your stomach and then you die after the fact, right? Therapy is the same in the sense that if we don't uncover these wounds, these hurts or these pains that you're going through, there's no way for you to realize where it's coming from or why it's happening in the first place, right? And then we can't do anything about it, right? So I agree with you totally that a lot of people are hesitant because they're afraid of it, but that fear also tells you something, And the question is, can you afford to live with that fear, that resentment, the anxiety about that problem? To be fair, some people say yes, and to that people I say okay, if that's something that's the cost you're willing to pay, then so be it, go for it, right? Some people will say no, I can't, and they think that's for those people. Then I think therapy might be good for you,
Right, got it. Yeah, and I wanted to kind of be a little bit more fancy with my next question, right? I am inspired by Tim Ferris. He is a very popular podcaster, and recently I realized that he's been asking this question. I'm just gonna copy it for now and find another version later on. The best form of flattery is copying, right? Okay, so if you can have a free big billboard overseeing the busiest road in Malaysia for men's mental health,
wow,
what will you have it say? You have it for an entire year, right? Free advertising, yeah.
Wow.
Or perhaps just mental health in general, right? But since we're talking about men's mental health and mental health, right? Yeah.
That's a wonderful question. I have no answer, no immediate answer for. Let me have a quick think about it.
Yes, have a think about that.
Wow. Right? Men's mental health, giant billboard.
Yeah. What's the busiest road? LDP.
Yeah, worse than federal sometimes.
Yeah.
You know what? I think I'd probably put up something along the lines of coming for a chat. What's the worst that could happen? Something like that, right?
What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Coming for a chat. Right?
Because I think I think the reason why I go that route, I think is because, like I said, I want to move away from the stereotypical cheesy lines and all that, right?
Yeah.
And also to tell them, what's the worst can happen, just if you don't like it, then leave.
Right.
If you like it, then let's go on with it,
right.
in a sense, right? And it's just a conversation, right?
Right.
A lot of times people think that therapy equals crying your eyes out. It doesn't have to be like that.
Doesn't have to. Right.
So just come to chat and see what happens.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, I try to cry, but I can't. So don't worry about crying. It may or may not happen, right?
Yeah.
Right.
To be fair, in therapy circles, if we have male clients who cry, right, we tell ourselves, okay, you're about halfway there already. It's a breaking point, not a breaking point, a tipping point. Sorry.
Yeah. I totally understand that, man, right? Because there's so many responsibility that they carry themselves without them realizing. Expectations that they carry from themselves, right? So I definitely say this, from experience as well. To build on that, maybe we can, if I have a billboard next to yours, what's the worst that can happen? Just come in for a chat, right? And then on the right hand side, I'll probably say the best thing that can happen is tomorrow is different. The worst thing that can happen, you make a friend.
That's brilliant. I love that. Yeah.
Because if it doesn't work out, you move on, you shake hands.
Yeah, off you go.
Right.
But to be fair, fun fact, there is actually an ethics.
Oh yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. You can't make friends. Okay. The worst that can happen is you had a great conversation.
There we go. Maybe good coffee.
I can't believe I forgot the last part. Okay, so we talk about everyone else. I wanted to ask you, right? Because you mentioned about the multiple hats that you do. And, there's one part you mentioned that, therapists, there's so many of them burn out themselves.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you in terms of how do you take care of your own, well-being, right? Especially being a mental health professional. Somebody's got to take care of the doctor, so to speak.
Yeah. So I've been asked this question quite a lot over the years, right?
Yeah.
And I think I am the worst candidate to answer that question because...
Right.
See, this is something I wanted to do since I was 14, right?
Yeah.
And for me, right, honestly, and I hand to heart, this is an honest answer. This is not a fluff thing. This is not a, oh my God, this is Joel kind of thing. No, it's not.
Hustle culture, toxic hustle culture.
Yeah, correct. It's not. I promise it's not. Therapy is fun for me.
Right.
It's not a job to me. It's when I go into my client, I see my clients, I speak to them. It's a place where I feel comfortable, I feel good, I feel excited, I leave the session feeling recharged.
Right.
It's not work for me, right? So work is keeping the lights on, paying my staff, making sure the tax department doesn't come and fry our butts, right? That's work.
Right.
So when I want a reprieve from that, I tell my business partner, hey, I'm going to take a couple more clients this month because I just need a break, right?
Yeah.
So the reason why, and that's why I say I'm the worst person possible to answer this question because I don't know how to answer that question.
Right.
I don't know whether I'm weird.
Right.
I don't know whether I'm odd like that. I don't know. But when people ask me things about burnout and things like that, right? I know the stock standard answers, right? You go see a therapist yourself, make sure you have a transitional object. I've got this clipboard I've used since my master's, I'm still using today. So it's one of those things where, if I hold the clipboard means I'm Joel the therapist. If I put down the clipboard means I'm Joel the daddy, the wife, husband, whatever it is, right? So set itself relaxation time and things like that.
Right.
So I know all the right answers, lah.
Right.
But if you ask me, have I ever utilized any of that necessarily, like, or out of necessity? Sorry, no, I've not. Right? Because for me, I just truly love what I do. Right.
Right.
I think the best. Yeah. There's just nothing. I really don't know how to answer that question.
Right.
But is it something that really can happen? Yes, it can. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great perspective, because I think, I truly welcome that perspective, simply because I think, to be able to find what you like to do and what you love to do and recharge via that. That's amazing, right? Because sometimes you spend a long time finding that, and for you to be able to find that. That's a really great blessing.
Yeah, I'm really lucky. Like, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine who recently sold off his company, right? So I was asking, oh great, so what are you gonna do now? He's in his 50s.
Right.
And I said, I've been doing this line of work for 30 years, right? Yeah. Now that I saw this, I have no idea what to do. I'm just so completely lost. And I was thinking to myself, wow, crap, if that ever happened to me, I don't know what I'll do. Right. It's so scary.
I think you don't have anything to worry about, simply because I think as long as they are humans, there will be problems. We are a problematic species, like it or not. Even if there's only 1 or 2 individuals left on this earth, I think we'll still be able to find some problems.
Yeah, I'm sure. My business partner was asking me that day, so when are you going to retire? When do you think you're going to retire? I said, I don't think I will. Because like I said, it's not a job to me. It's just enjoyable. I just love doing this. Like, and it extends to like teaching as well. Like not teaching like classroom, but like supervising young practitioners. I love that.
Right.
And again, it's not a job. It's just enjoyable. It's such a good process. So I'm like, I don't think I ever will.
Well, this reminds me of, I think it was the story of Carl Jung, if not mistaken, right? One of the the grandmasters, right? The textbooks are written about him. I think up until his very late life, he was still talking to people and teaching people.
That's right. Him, Yalom as well, same thing.
Yeah, I can definitely see that happening for you in a very positive manner, for sure.
Nowhere near as prestigious, but hopefully.
Similar to that. So I think maybe as a closing question, right? I really had a lot of fun, and I wish we can do this a little bit longer. But I do have quite a lot of young aspiring psychology majors. When they come through the door, my door, 3 years ago, we tell them to be open. If you really want to be a practitioner, you have the opportunity to speak to the professionals, because we work with them, right? Because don't be that person that says you want to be someone but never really trying to understand what you want to be. On the other hand, you have a perfect balance of being on the business side or the management side, to be able to see what kind of different careers if you can happen to have if you don't want to continue. Right? So for those that are still navigating, and perhaps right now at this point of time, you're trying to figure out, right? What kind of advice do you maybe have to navigate the field of psychology to really, find out, is this really for them?
That's really a really good question, but it's also very problematic in the sense that as an undergraduate, for example, you really cannot, there's not much exposure you can have to therapy from a therapist perspective, right? You can be a client, that's not an issue. Most universities have pro bono sessions for their students and things like that, so you can try it out. So that one, from a client perspective, no issues, right?
Right.
But from a therapist perspective, it's very hard, because not very many clients are going to willingly say yes to be
someone sitting there to
it's
observe.
Like a fish in a bowl and get stared at by a bunch of kids, right? So that's always a problem, right? So like for us here at the Mind, for example, we don't take in undergrad interns, because your whole internship experience is for you to learn, right? If you come here, the only thing you're going to learn is how to photocopy stuff and, I don't know, greet clients for what? We don't see a point in doing that, right? So that's that catch there, right? How do you know you're going to do something, like something, if you don't ever try it, right?
Yeah, and you can't try, because you cannot practice, right?
So there are a few workarounds a little bit.
Right.
One of them is to join student, student groups. So like in Help last time, we had that PSG, peer support group, for example, where they give you para-counseling courses, then you become a peer supported person. Befrienders, for example, they take volunteers. Organizations like MMHA, they have both the clinical wing and also the non-clinical wing. Non-clinical wing, you do more of like community work, reaching out to PPRs and things like that. So by engaging in all these auxiliary or support therapy companies or services, you get a sense of it, Right?
Right.
It's not the same thing, definitely no, but it exposes you enough to the population that you're going to be working with, the people who are in need, for example, and things like that, and to see whether that's something that jives with you or not, lah,
Right.
at that level. Lah.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's really something that you will only truly know once you actually start
Right.
to feel. Unfortunately, lah, that's the problem, lah, right?
Mm.
To be fair, it's not to say like once you graduate with your masters, for example, and if you don't want to be a clinician, you're screwed. It's not that, right? You can also, you can teach. There's research.
Yeah.
And I've got lots of people who I know who have branched off into very many different fields, right? So I've got a friend who is now an actor. I've got a friend now who is also doing running a business. Doing what again? I can't remember. Some other kind of business, like in a sense, like non-site related one. Many friends have become lecturers and educators, academicians and things
Right.
like that, right? So there are still options available. Lah,
Of course.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, lah, it's one of those things where, you know, you have to try it out and see, and unfortunately to try it out you got to wait and see. Lah.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's a good perspective to have because I've also I think it relates to something I heard recently from Derek Sivers as well, because he was asked the question. He wrote many books, one of those that, very well, achieved in his life. Very interesting guy with a different perspective of life as well. So he was talking about entrepreneurship, right? He was talking about, what kind of business would you start, he was asked. And he said that I need to first like the customers, because these are the people, are the very people that I'm serving. If I can't stand the customers, and I need to serve them day in, day out, I may not feel very good about what I'm doing on a long-term basis.
That's right. That's
right.
a wonderful way to look at it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Is there any like unexpected skills that you realize like, hey, actually as a professional, you kind of need to have that, but nobody really actually
As a
teaches
therapist?
you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. How do I say this without shooting myself in the foot?
Maybe what you observe in other people, you may or may not be someone else.
No, that's not fair. Okay, so two things, right? One, I think, is just being able to be absolutely calm under pressure, right? So this isn't something you typically relate with therapy, right? Because therapy is supposed to be, calm, chill kind of thing. The reason why I say that is because the sheer amount of random things clients can throw at you,
Right.
Not physically throw, but figuratively when they say stories and all that, right? The kind of the stories that I've heard so far in this room will drive anyone crazy sometimes, right? This is like, what in the world just happened there? It's like you don't expect it.
Right.
And I think the last thing the client needs is for a therapist's jaw to drop to the floor and go, holy shit, what the hell, right?
Or their face change.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So I tell my young practitioners here, right? When in doubt, smile and nod until the client leaves. Then you can call me and freak out, right? That's fine.
Right.
Until that happens, just smile and nod,
Right.
because you need to be the calm, chill, serene, relaxed one in the room.
Yes.
No matter what the client throws at you, you go,
You need to be
okay.
the absolute professional.
Exactly. After that, you freak out as much as you want. That's fine. Then you have full
Right.
permission to do so. So I think that's the first one.
Right.
Second one, I think that is again oftentimes
Untold.
untold lah, right? Is this lah, right? Everywhere you go, teaching facilities and all, they'll tell you, okay, you have a treatment plan, you follow the treatment plan, execute treatment plan and all that. What I tell my young practitioners, my interns and all that is, you know what, screw the plan, right? Because you are not dealing with a car that needs to be serviced.
A robot.
Correct.
Yeah.
That has a manual, that has a service lifetime and all that. No, you're dealing with people. You can see the same client for 2 years and they're still going to throw you a curveball sometimes, right? And the more you plan, the more you make yourself anxious, the more you get frustrated when the plan doesn't go accordingly.
Right.
So the other thing I was going to say is be comfortable not being in control,
Right.
not having a plan. For me, I prepare by the sense that I read my case notes and all that, so I know who my clients are, of course, definitely sure. But if you ask me what I'm going to do with my client today, I don't know, right? Because I don't know what my client's going to bring, right?
Yeah.
So being okay with that lack of control, being comfortable with just going with the flow is really, really important. Because I think sometimes we forget that therapy is not about what the therapist wants or the therapist plans, it's about what the client needs, right? So I think these are the two unexpected things that I've had to learn. And for me, being not the greatest student in the world kind of thing, that worked out wonderfully for me. I was like, okay, great. No plan. Right, let's see what happens. Right, it worked out really well.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Joel. I guess as a closing note, if they want to get therapy and they want to, perhaps, see more of, what you have to say as well, where can they find you?
So easiest way to find me would be through our socials. So if you go to any major network like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the mine PSAT. So that's Penang, Singapore, Australia, Thailand. That's which is
Nice.
short for Psychologist Services and Training.
Mm.
You'll find us there. If you want to look for a therapist, obviously you can look for us. But I recommend if you want other options, let's say from out of state, or you want other kind of expertise, the safest places to go to would be the LKM website, which I don't know here. Maybe you can link them.
Yeah, in the show notes or something. Lembaga Counselling Malaysia website.
That's right.
Okay.
And also the MSCP website lah.
MSCP
Because that's where all the registered and legitimate people are. That's the safest place to look for your services lah. Right.
Right.
There are lots of people who are offering their services online, but there's no way to vouch for their credibility. Right. Through these websites, you're at least going through people that have been vetted by the committees and societies, so it'll be quite safe lah.
Thank you so much for that, Joel. So I finally, I really want to thank you for being on the show and giving